You have to keep going and you have to keep learning and you have to keep growing in order to earn the privilege of then leading other people.
Many people play basketball, but then there's Michael Jordan. You know, they're all leaders. All the people that play basketball are leaders. They all lead because they lead like high school students and college. But then you have your Michael Jordan, which is the leader of the leaders.
Crossing your fingers and hoping for the best doesn't create the future. You might get lucky, but then again, you might not. Even read stuff that you don't agree with, because you never know. It'll just open up a window of, what if? So what if what I believe actually isn't 100%? Maybe I need to think about this differently. And I think when we can do that, we become better leaders. Now, I don't think anyone's actually asked me that specific question before.
Today, I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Stacey Ashley. She's not just a coach, but a leadership visionary who has dedicated over 30 years to inspiring and guiding others on their leadership journey. An internationally recognized figure, Dr. Ashley has clinched an astounding 14 Stevie Awards and has been honored twice in LinkedIn's prestigious Top Voices. Beyond her accolades, she's the proud author of 6 Amazon #1 best-selling books on leadership. She excels at transitioning complex concepts into practical ideas for immediate application. Join us as we tap into her wealth of experience and insight on leadership competence, confidence, and credibility. Welcome, Dr. Stacey Ashley.
Thank you so much, Nima. I'm really delighted to be here.
Of course. Thank you so much for being. So before we get started, I was on Google and I typed in leadership and I wanted to see what are the top questions that people ask on Google on the topic of leadership. And the number one, which I'm sure you would probably guess already, would be, what is the best definition? And I think if we could just set that ground before we start and get in depth. I know that might be a big question to start with. We could probably talk an hour just on the definition. But what is, I guess, your definition of leadership?
That is a big question to start with. Don't hold back. There's so many ways of approaching leadership. The way that I like to think about leadership is that you really take on a responsibility for leaving things better than you found them. And you can do that in so many ways. And I think leadership for me is making sure that wherever you focus your attention, your energy and that sort of thing, it's really focused on the right things rather than just doing stuff for the sake of doing it. So I think it's being purposeful and intentional and having a bigger picture perspective with the intention of creating the future and creating opportunity. And as I said, making things or leaving things better than you found them.
Love that. And anyone nowadays can hold a title of leader. And I don't know what it is in the past year or after COVID, everyone thinks they're a leader. Everyone's an entrepreneur or a leader. Anyone can hold the title of a leader, but not many can hold the title of being a great leader. In order to be able to coach leaders, I feel like you have to be a great leader yourself at first, which obviously you have shown from, as I mentioned in the intro, your multiple accolades and winning awards, and obviously what you've been able to accomplish yourself. You are a great leader. What was something that you had to learn about leadership before you're starting your journey of coaching other leaders?
And it's an interesting one, and I do get asked that a little bit. But I think for me, I really started my leadership journey at a very young age. So I think I led my first team on stage at the age of 6. And so I didn't ever have this point in time where I went, oh, I've decided I'm going to become a leader. It was just in everything I ever did, whether it was sport or school or in the workplace. Though what I learned as I matured as a leader, there was a couple of things. One, I had to recognize that actually, I didn't know best about everything. So that was a big, I think that's a big one, particularly for emerging leaders when they feel the pressure of expectation to know the answer to everything. Actually, as the leader, you don't have to know the answer to everything. And then I think that the other thing is really, for me, was recognizing that actually leadership starts with me. And so I really need to first be focused on myself. How much do I know about myself? how am I showing up? How am I contributing to whatever the situation is or the outcomes are? And what can I do to continue to grow myself so that as a leader, I'm really role modeling, that learning journey and getting better and always then being in the position of having something to offer other people as a leader, not just kind of resting on my laurels going, hey, I've been pretty good in the past, so therefore I'll be pretty good in the future. I think that's a really important thing. I think we've all seen those leaders who have a great track record and they get to a point and they just sort of sit there, and that's when they start to not be leading because they're just kind of going through the motions of the same old things. And so I think for me, that was probably quite a big realization in the middle of my leadership career. Like, you know what, you can't just go, hey, look at all these amazing things I've done in the past. You have to keep going and you have to keep learning and you have to keep growing in order to earn the privilege of then leading other people.
Yeah, it's so you say you since the age of 6, you kind of were a leader. How do you feel about? Do you think good leaders had to be raised a certain type of way? Their household, the people they hung out with. Do you think that had an impact on your style of leadership, at least of how you're doing it now, of how you were raised? Did your parents have strategic like pressure on you, whether it's like a certain way of doing things, like you have to read this many books in order for you to get this, or you can't go play if you didn't do this? How was your
Uh,
childhood upbringing?
yeah, and it's an interesting thing because, again, on reflection, you kind of gain all these insights that you
Yeah,
didn't sort of recognize at
yeah,
the time.
yeah.
I had the incredible good fortune to have a father who was an amazing leader.
Okay.
And so it wasn't like leadership is drummed into you, but it's just, one of those things that you sort of pick up by osmosis when it's in your
Yeah.
environment. And, as I became a teenager and that sort of thing, yes, we would have discussions about leadership. But before then, it wasn't, read the books or do the homework or anything like that, no more than any other parent. But it was really seeing leadership in action. So again, he was captain of his sports teams as well as being a leader in the workspace and all of that sort of thing. And I think, definitely those influences, everyone has that teacher, in their
Yeah.
history who was very influential. And so you can learn from them. And so I definitely think that there are influences that impacted me and also, for everyone else. But even if you weren't exposed to those things earlier in life, doesn't mean that you cannot be exposed to them later in life and develop yourself as a leader, regardless of title.
Why is leadership so hard to understand, where it gives people like yourself a job to be able to lead leaders? Why can't leaders just understand the concept of leadership? Why is it so difficult?
I think that part of it comes from, all right, so if people start work and they go into the workplace and no one actually says, let me tell you about leadership. Let me tell you what's important about leadership. Let me tell you what I've learned. Here are all my lessons. Let me give them to you for free. um, and so I think kind of that's why there are some individuals who do that and they're amazing and they really um, generously support, the path of leaders who are following them. But I think that that's still more of a rarity than a common kind of occurrence. So I think that what happens is people just sort of fumble along and they figure out what works, and they might see someone who's doing something that seems to be working, so they try that out. And it's sort of an experimentation process as rather than an education or a proactive education process. And so I think that what that means is, it is hard because we do have to often figure it out on our own rather than, step 1, do this, step 2, explore that, step 3, and get feedback on this is going really well. You need to learn a little bit more here, or have you thought about that? And so I think there's this precedent of leaders don't necessarily naturally pass on the lessons of leadership in a proactive way. And so every next generation of leaders or next quorum of leaders are, they're just trying to do the best that they can rather than everyone being set up for success as a leader.
There's so many people I feel like that become leaders because they're good at what they do and they just kind of end up in a leadership position. And I call those people managers, not leaders. What
Yeah.
would be a
Mm,
checklist for you to have someone go from being a manager to a leader?
yeah. Um, Gosh. No, I don't think anyone's actually asked me that specific question before, but it's some of the things that I would think about, and it's not so much necessarily the skills, because I like anything. I do believe that largely leadership skills can be taught. I think it's more some questions around: are they interested in becoming a leader? Do they really want to? Because not everyone does, and that's completely fine. Some people are great subject matter expertise, and we need them. We do need great managers. So that would be the first thing. Is this of interest to them, and are they interested in learning and growing, and also in accepting that responsibility that becomes larger and larger and larger the further you go into your leadership career? So that for me would be probably the number one on the tick list. Is this of interest, and what are they prepared to do to get there, to become a leader?
Do you think society does a bad job in explaining what it takes to be a leader? Like they push everyone to be a leader, be a leader. Like when you're in school, go for leadership
Eh,
positions, be involved, be the president. But they don't
well,
really explain the true definition of being leadership, like entrepreneurship, right? Everyone loves being an
well,
entrepreneur, putting the word, but they don't really understand that you're not going to have a son. You might have to do an interview on a Sunday or a Monday or Saturday. You're not ever stepping down from that work. And I feel like that part of
mm,
it is not emphasized enough in society, more so than the position and title.
yeah, yeah, and actually, I talk a lot about this in my book. There's a lot of people who will go, yes, I want the big title and I want all the privileges and that sort of thing, but they don't recognise that with that comes really significant responsibility,
Yeah.
and I think that's the gap. Is if you accept the privileges of leadership, you must accept the responsibility of leadership. And that's not just about delivering commercial outcomes. It's about the people that you have responsibility for, and it's about the reputation of the organisation. It's the responsibility, that you have every day as a leader to show up and to lead. Um, and so I think that that's a gap. And then I think the other thing is that leadership is not just positional,
Mhm.
and so there are lots of forms of leadership. There is thought
Yeah.
leadership, and there's program leadership, and there's being a leader within your team, for example. All those people that don't have titles, yet they demonstrate and role model leadership. And I think we
Yeah.
need to recognize that, because that is such an important part of um, us being, as a society, able to navigate the complexity that we face, to lean into some of these very significant challenges that, if we don't find a way through them, are going to have pretty big consequences.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. Yeah, there is definitely a gap there.
I think we need to understand that just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you cannot be led by someone else. That's a
Yeah,
big
yeah,
concept. And I think that a lot of people that go to that leadership position without actually understanding that, that's where they become managers and not leaders. A great
mm,
leader, in my opinion, is one that's able to see people on who they can be, not on who they are
mm,
today and who they were. Do you
mm.
see this approach often in leaders you're working with, or is this something that you have to feel like you have to teach them and bring that to their attention to how they should be with their employees?
Mm. I think like anything, there's a spectrum. I'm very fortunate. The people that I work with are typically already pretty amazing. so, so they do have a real sense that the people around them, have their particular strengths and potential and that sort of thing. And their job as the leader is to recognize that and to create opportunity for them to thrive and flourish and really, you know, um, access that potential.
Mhm.
But I know that there are people in leadership roles in lots of organisations who perhaps don't have the same level of recognition, or even the same level of skill. Because what we've got to remember is, and sometimes I forget this, is that I've done a lot of learning about, how to talk to people and how to listen to people, and different types of personalities, and, all sorts of stuff. Not everybody has done that learning or had that opportunity. They've done different learning. And so I think that we have to temper the expectation with a bit of reality to go, so maybe these people haven't been exposed to these concepts. So let's
Yeah.
expose them to the concepts. And then that creates the opportunity for them to be able to work with more effectively and proactively with the people around them. So I think it's just as much as anything, often it's lack of opportunity.
Yeah. I think leadership, like we said in the beginning, like it's such a big topic and you're always learning so much that it takes experience and you actually going through it for you to understand how to be a good leader. And that's, I guess,
Well,
where you come in, because what have you learned from the people or CEOs or leaders that you work with? What are some things that you've learned from them that you took away? Because you're doing a lot of the teaching part when I'm assuming, when you're in these sessions and in these coaching sessions. What have you picked up from other people?
yeah, I think one of the leaders that comes to mind, the thing that I really admire about her is she has such a depth of humanity in her leadership, and you can see it in the organisation. Very, very large organisation. Probably 30,000 people
Wow.
in this organisation, and everybody knows this CEO and has huge respect and admiration for her because she's a very real person, and she treats everyone as very real people. And because of that, she's able to create really significant change in the way that the organisation operates and what they set out to do. And they accomplish a lot, probably more than you would anticipate, simply because her people are so engaged because she's such a real person. And so I think that and that's a real learning for me, because I know certainly in my early career, and I think lots of leaders do this, particularly early in their careers, you have the mask, like I'm all
Yeah.
knowing and all seeing, and not necessarily a real human.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been a real learning for me, and I think more and more in our changing world, people respond to that humanity. They want a
Yeah.
human experience.
And do you think that's where we're at now? That's where the disconnection was in the past? That now we need that more? Because I feel like you're right, because the people that make you feel like they understand where you're at, or they understand what you're going through, or they understand, for example, I'm a pharmacist in the States, and there are certain companies in the States that are led by pharmacies that are not led by pharmacists, that are led by business people.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, like they don't really understand us and what we go through and what we do because they never went to pharmacy school. They never practiced as a pharmacist. But then as that changed and this company picked up leaders that are pharmacists, you see that the company is doing better because they have leaders leading them that understand the people that are below them or under them.
Right.
So I totally agree with you. The topic of big leadership, your book's called Big Leadership. Um, Explain to the people what that means and why is that such an important topic for the year coming in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Um, Big leadership was a concept that sort of evolved. I know we're not saying the C word anymore, but it kind of evolved during that period where I started to see that the demands and expectations of leadership were changing really rapidly. And part of that was what we've just talked about, the expectation of leadership and how leaders show up and contribute and that sort of thing. But also the complex that we're operating now. If I quote a couple of statistics, so the PwC Global survey from 2023 shared that more than 40% of CEOs globally believe that if they continue to operate in the same way, their organisation will very quickly not be commercially viable. So things have to change. The belief in senior leaders is at an all-time low with I think it's like 74% of employees not believing that their leaders have what it takes to lead their organisation
Yeah.
into the future, which is
Wow.
kind of scary, right?
Yeah.
It's like 83% of millennials. And look, and then we've got all the complexities we know about supply chain and talent and economic, what will I say, a bit of an economic downturn, political unrest. We've got all of those things, but there's some real keys around leadership. And what I started to think about is, if we just keep doing things the same way, we're actually, as leaders and as CEOs, going to become irrelevant, not current anymore, and not actually even leading just a maintenance function. We're just going to get out of date really quickly. And so what does that mean? So as leaders, I think leadership needs to become big. And by big, what I mean is not the biggest in volume or in size of organization, but big as in having significance and impact and influence and gravitas, doing important things. And for that to happen as leaders, we've sort of got to get out of our comfort zone, and we need to expand our perspective of leadership, to really recognize some of those responsibility things that I was talking about. You have a responsibility to lead yourself, your people, your organization. Just going through the motions, being in maintenance mode is not enough. Over probably not a very long period of time, you will slowly become, or you'll quickly become, irrelevant, not contributing at the level that you need to. And we know, the World Economic Forum is telling us that, nearly 50% of the workforce needs to be reskilled by 2030. Well, that includes leaders, and so big leadership was really, it was a challenge to leaders. When I wrote the book, it's like, wake up, it's time to decide. You can just keep going through the motions and then slowly, see your leadership career slide away, or you can do something differently. You need to expand your own experiences and perspectives of the world. You need to be bolder with your decision-making. Just crossing your fingers and hoping for the best doesn't create the future. You might get lucky, but then again, you might not. And then taking really brave action, don't procrastinate. Actually move to action, be purposeful, be intentional. And does that mean that you stick your head above the parapet a little bit more often? Yes. But if you don't do that, you kind of don't matter anymore. And so big leadership is, again, super practical, big picture perspective, but then here are some practical ways of how to embrace big leadership and step into that space where you are a leader who acknowledges and accepts the responsibility of leadership and then proactively commits to embracing it and taking action.
I think in order for that to happen, we're going to need like 50 more clones of you to go ahead and lead this, because everything you're saying, I think, is very logical, right? It's very common sense, but it's not. I think it takes a certain type of leader to really grasp it. And I think leadership has to do with mindset a lot nowadays. Like leaders need to change their mindset and the way they look at things, and then they could understand logic. They could understand to learn from history. I took a left last time. I failed. Let's try it right. Not say, no, we're going to go left and we're going to get it right this time again. I think it's like a mindset thing. How far do you go ahead?
I was going to say, look, I agree with that. And that, again, comes back to self, like learn from that and become more informed and open based on that. So, yeah, I'd agree.
And I think like who we look at as our mentors, who we look up to, can have a big influence, especially nowadays. We have a lot of leaders out there, right? If you follow the wrong person on LinkedIn, or you follow the wrong person on Instagram, and you see all their inspirational quotes and you fall in love with them, and one day they post something that might not be the right thing, but you love them so much and you find such influence from that you pick it up after them, then it's just over. So I think it's important for people to understand who they admire, who they look up to, and put in the time to actually do the research to see where that person comes from and where their perspective and mindset is.
And I would agree with that. The other thing I would say is a single source of truth doesn't give you the truth. And so one of the things that I talk about in big leadership is, expand your perspective is exactly that. Don't just follow that one person that, it may well be, amazing, but have a variety of sources of truth. The way that, all the algorithms work on our news sites and social media and that sort of thing If you start to follow a particular thing, you're going to get more of that just to reinforce it. And our brain likes it because, there's no cognitive dissonance, but it doesn't expand our perspective. It doesn't expand our leadership. And so have multiple sources of inspiration and provocation and that sort of thing, because that will help you to become a better leader. Even read stuff that you don't agree with, because you never know. It'll just open up a window of, what if? Though, what if what I believe actually isn't 100%? Maybe I need to think about this differently. And I think when we can do that, and that partly that's mindset, because it's a growth mindset.
Yeah.
When we can do that, we become better leaders.
Being able to become mentally strong enough to communicate with people you disagree with is the best type of way I feel like you can learn how to be a great leader. Like putting yourself in a room with someone that totally disagrees with you, and you have a mutual calm conversation with them and walk away with like nothing happened.
Absolutely.
A big part of, like I said, I'm a pharmacist, and a big part of community retail pharmacy in the United States has to do with metrics. And I feel like you have make sure you meet your flu vaccine metrics this month. Hey guys, you're behind. Make sure you get 40 vaccines this month. What part do you think metrics play in corporations in taking away from the leader, allowing people to be leaders instead of like just trying to check mark a box?
Yeah, interesting. I think metrics are incredibly valuable because it's information, right? So there are two things that I think are important when we consider leadership and metrics. One is that we are measuring the things that matter. And two is that we're then using that information, where we're understanding the story behind the information, behind the metric, and we're using that to inform how we then move forward or how we lead into the future. But doing we always produce this report, so we'll produce this report. No, we don't have time to analyze it. We'll just tick, did we make it or did we not make it? I don't think there's a lot of value in that. So we have to be purposeful with what we choose to measure, and then how we utilize that information to inform, to support decision making, to inform our strategic planning, all of those sorts of things. So I think the responsibility of leadership actually is to make sure that we do both of those things, and then to take that information as a source of information to utilize. And I think the other thing, though, that I would say with that, and it sort of couples around this decision-making space, and you sort of talked about, if we go left, we always go left, that one of the big things I think that's really important about leadership now is take the information that you have and make the decision. But when new information comes in and that decision, now you realize maybe it's not the best decision, then change the decision. We don't have to set our decisions in concrete and never move from them. I think leaders today, that use of information to inform and then, confirm or actually go, what, we need to update that decision. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's very well put. And it's something that kind of goes back to, I think you mentioned a little earlier, you actually posted it on LinkedIn. You said the rate of change is so great that the skills you have today will no longer serve you and be relevant by 2030. How often do you think we should change business theories in our corporations?
I don't know if there's a particular time frame. I think, like many of these things, it's about continuing to be aware, noticing the patterns. I have a great colleague, Michael McQueen, and he talks about change and the future, and he talks about waves and tides. So a wave is just a thing in the moment, it's maybe something that's popular, right? And the tide shifts the landscape. So what we've got to be aware of are the tides. So noticing the information and going, okay, is this a tide that we need to respond to as commercially savvy human leaders?
Do you think, from working with a lot of leaders, do you think leaders are, ready for all the change that's happening so fast? Because I feel like, one day you have ChatGPT, then you have Elon Musk hitting you with Grok. And then you have corporations be like, oh my God, which one do I go for? Then Microsoft hits you with this side. Do you think it's
Right.
coming at such a fast pace that it's all going to crumble? We have to start from zero again?
I'm not a tech expert, so I don't
No,
know the
I
answer
guess,
to that.
I guess
But
your
you know what
opinion,
I
yeah,
would do
because you know what I
is
mean? Like,
I would ask those real experts in those spaces around me, and I think that's the role of leadership. A leader cannot keep up with everything that's changing. That's just not possible. They need to have that universal leadership skill set that enables them to tap into the people who are the experts and who can give advice and guidance and those sorts of things. And so I think any leader who's trying to keep up with everything, you've set yourself an impossible task. So yeah, you got to be aware, but there are people who are better at it than you are, who are more immersed in that space, and they can be, the conduit of relevant information and insights, that sort of thing. And your job as a leader is to tap into that.
yeah. And I think a good leader is one that's able to say, listen, I don't know anything about this. I'm going to give it to you because you know all about it. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's, missing a little bit, but I think we're getting there. And I think the rapid changes is forcing leaders to think that way because, man, like, listen, if you're like a 70-year-old leader and you don't know nothing, you might need a 25-year-old leader to come in and try to explain to you what ChatGPT is because you just don't know. And you're just so used to the old way of doing things. We touched a little bit on metrics. How do you judge a great leader based on measurable data?
I probably don't. That's probably my personal place. Look, I think there is data that you can use to inform your assessment of a leader's um, performance and value and those sorts of things. But I think just relying on metrics alone is not necessarily going to serve you. And again, it depends what you're measuring. Are you measuring not just commercial outcomes, but are you measuring things like turnover in that person's team, or how often people in that person's team get promoted or contribute to some amazing thing that the organisation does? So it's not just about those really clear-cut elements. So, and what's your measure of what makes a leader great
Yeah. So would you
or
say that
good or successful?
so would you say that you can measure a great leader based on the people that they're leading and who they are becoming, where they are going, what progress they've made since being under that leadership?
Look, I think that's definitely a great set of inputs, not the only ones, because leadership is about also doing things like creating an organization that's sustainable, relevant, commercially successful. But yes, the people side, I think, is a big factor. But, I would go further than that. It's, how strategically well set up, are they in the business? Do they have a leadership pipeline following them? That's one of the big gaps that I see is a leader could be very successful, very effective, really well loved and liked, and all of bringing out the best in their people and that sort of thing. And yet they don't have an immediate successor. That to me is a failure of leadership,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
there's a gap. We need, so there's so many measures of what, is a successful or great leader. And I think, it does take a lot of effort to cover them all off.
Sure. If I said, listen, you have two types of people you could work with for the rest of your life. Would you rather work with the experienced leaders, 10, 20, 30 years? Or would you rather work with a fresh, new, out of grad school MBA leader?
Yeah. For me personally, I would work with the more senior leader.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because the cascade effect from them downward is significant. I still love working with emerging leaders. However, I just feel like I can make a bigger difference with those more senior leaders. They're not necessarily 30 years experience, but they're typically more senior. They've got a broader span of control and a bigger portfolio. But my hope is that by working with those people, it then, has the impact right to the earliest levels of leadership.
Correct. So you're hitting both of them, two birds, one stone. I like that answer. I like the way you answered it. What industry do you see are the easiest to work with? Which industry do you think is a little more challenging?
Yeah. Again, look, I think this is very personal. So, for me, I probably find it easier to work with industries that I'm more familiar with because I understand the jargon and the language and some of the typical experiences and that sort of thing. Which doesn't mean I don't work with industries that I have less experience with, but I have a lot more to learn, in order to be as effective as I can be there. So for me, I work in corporate,
Yes.
often white collar kind of environments. Um, but also, I've worked in media and pharmacy, and I've done education and, various government and that sort of thing. So I think the big thing is, really people are people. It's not, and the industry doesn't change that. And when we're talking about leadership, yes, there are going to be industry specific elements that are about, what kind of widgets we produce and how we sell them and that sort of thing. But people, in all industries, respond to great leadership.
What role do you think the word empathy plays in being a good leader?
Hmm. This is a challenging one, I think. I believe that there's a level of empathy that is valuable and useful. And what I personally, and this is a question that I've sort of worked through over many years, is as the leader, though, there is a point at which you need to continue to lead. So you can't this is my personal belief. If you allow yourself to get so immersed in the being empathetic and in the space with another person or a group of people, I'm not saying it does, but how does that potentially compromise your ability to lead?
Sure.
So we have this balance of empathy, but not so much empathy that it becomes disabling in your leadership. And maybe there isn't a point at which it is disabling, but I have seen people who become so empathetic, if I can say, which is wonderful and amazing. But then they haven't been able to make a decision about what to do in a situation, and so we've got this this balance that is going to be different, I think, for each person in their leadership, between being, a person of real empathy, human, and having this responsibility of leadership for the greater good.
You mentioned earlier that and leadership can be learned. And I recently had Dr. Jeff Spencer. He was the Tour de France coach, team doctor for Lance Armstrong. And he said
Yeah.
winning is something that can be learned.
Mhm.
Um, how do you teach someone how to lead that just doesn't have I think it goes back to mindset again. I think it just comes back to the way you look at things. I mean, do you not think that some people are just not wired? Some people can be number one, but some people are just great at being number two. They can never be number one. They could be great number twos.
Yep.
But how do
Yep.
you teach someone to be in a number one?
Yeah, in a way, I agree. I don't think you can teach someone to be number one. It's a choice, right? I think it comes down to being a choice. Um, and some of the people who make that choice may never get to number one, but they'll continue to strive and learn and grow, and because of that, they'll become amazing at what they do. But what is number one? Some of the most amazing leaders that I have seen don't hold the top job, but they make a remarkable contribution in the space in which they are operating. So, what is number one? That would be the first thing. But I think leadership, in terms of the learning, comes back to that openness, growth mindset, willingness to put the work in, self-awareness, learning on the journey, all of those things. So can it be learned? Yes, if the individual is open to and wants to.
Yeah. You have so many accomplishments that you have achieved over the years. What's an accomplishment you're proud of in your life that has shaped your character and career?
Oof. Just give me a moment.
Yeah, no, of course.
I think one of the most important things is becoming a mum.
Okay.
Really changed my perspective on a lot of things because I had a lot of my corporate career pre-children. And I, as a leader, I think I got a new appreciation for all of the people around me that were navigating this family thing and work thing, and I think my perspective, probably my humanity changed, developed, matured, and I think that my tolerance levels probably changed quite significantly, and my appreciation of what is important changed.
It's crazy that it's a great answer. And I think it's a great answer that a lot of amazing leaders also give, like really great leaders. Do you think it's interesting that like another person's life has such a big impact on us when it's our own blood? But how can we take that feeling that your daughter or son, I'm not sure, gives you and put it into other people to give to us? Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say, like that feeling of having a child, how it made you change and have a big impact on how you look at things. How are
Yeah.
we able to grab that feeling from other people to influence us and to impact us? I know it could be through a
Yeah.
mentor, but, I feel like that child, people, whoever, has a daughter, son, whoever it is, it always has that impact on them. But why wait
Yeah.
till you have that person give that impact? Why are we not searching to find that impact through others? Does that make sense?
Yeah, look, it does. I think two things. One is if you haven't yet had the experience of parenting or caring for someone in that kind of close relationship, you probably don't, not probably, you may not know that that experience is out there waiting for you in some form. And so you wouldn't necessarily go proactively seeking it. Um, and I think the other thing is that if I go back to the humanity of leadership, I feel like, fortunately, in the last few years, we've seen a real acceleration to the openness of humanity and leadership. It's always been really important, but it wasn't necessarily talked about 20, 30, 40, 50, 100
Yeah.
years ago. Now we have those conversations. And so what I think that's done is it's opened up the possibility to create more of those human experiences, connected experiences, taking joy in other people's success or growth, and actually ourselves up to receiving that. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. And I think we should probably all do more of it because,
Yeah.
wouldn't that be good for the world?
Yeah, it's exactly what you said earlier. Again, when I asked about being leadership, like human aspects of it, I guess that's what I was trying to get at. Like, we need more of
Mhm.
that, which you said we need in the title of big
Yeah.
leadership. We need more of that in 2024, and I think it's going to be an interesting year. So we're going to need a lot of that to be able to get through it. How do you
Yeah.
self discipline? I think is big. Whether I don't, if well, it doesn't matter if it's leadership or life. Being able to be self disciplined to, hey, listen, I'm going to go to the gym and not eat bad food. I'm not going to eat that burger for a year. And for you to tell yourself, hey, man, I really want that burger, but I can't have it. That self-discipline, it creates such a strong inner you. How do you teach self-discipline? Because without self-discipline, I don't believe you can build a great leader.
Hmm. Again, I think there's a lot of choice here. So I can teach people the skills,
Mhm.
I can give them strategies, um, all of those sorts of things. I can ask them questions to reveal, so that they can explore their own ideas and thoughts. But at the end of the day, I can't make someone be self-disciplined. That's something that they will do for themselves. I can say to them, "Hey, I know you don't have the discipline yet, but I'm telling you, if you do this every day for the next 3 weeks, it'll start to come." They still have to start. I can't do that for them. I can book a meeting or go for a walk or go for a run or go to the gym. I could help, but at the end of the day, it is the individual
Yeah.
who makes the choice to do that. So I don't know that it can be taught. I
Yeah.
think it can be encouraged. I
Yeah.
think it can give all the ideas. And I think we can ask questions to help people anchor into what's important to help them with the choice. So, if it's the health thing, for example, whatever that looks like for someone, what's important about that? What would make it important enough for them to act,
Yeah.
to take action? And lots of people, I think, get stuck in that, I want to lose 5 kilos, or I don't want to drink as much alcohol, or those sorts of things, as opposed to what would make it important. I want to run around the backyard with my kids. Like, that's a much more powerful thing for a parent than I want to lose 5 kilos. Or I want to see the world, and I want to be fit enough, to really experience that. That potentially has the power to be, much stronger as a motivator to create that self-discipline. And so I think that's another way we can help people to foster their own self-discipline, is to really help them identify what makes this really important to you.
So, yeah. And I asked this because I just want to play devil's advocate. When you say leadership can be learned, right? And then we say, yeah, it can be taught, but I can't teach you how to make the steps. I can't teach you to implement them. And that just goes in my mind. I go back to, that's just something that, it has to spark something in you. It's your mindset. It has to spark something in you for you to make that move, because there's plenty of leadership books, like many of the ones that you've written, that people can pick up, read. And if they just do everything that's in that book, they can become great leaders. But guess what? I'm sure many of people have read your books, but have not been able to implement it because they just don't have that in them. And again, going back to my previous interview with Dr. Jeffrey Spencer, he's an Olympian cyclist for the USA team. And he said his coach, when he was a young kid, he said, hey, come to our sessions, our practice sessions. I don't want you to get on a bike. I don't want you to do anything. I just want you to watch. I just want you to be around the conversation. And if this is meant for you, you'll know, and it will spark something in you. And he did, and he went home and it sparked something in him. To me, that makes me feel like not that you're born with it, but maybe your surroundings, your experiences, there's something that makes you give that extra push. Whether you're an immigrant and you're doing it because of your parents, whether there's an enemy and you just want to prove them wrong, whether it be something, there's something that has to spark that. And I think that it's inner to you rather than something that can be taught. I don't know if it can be taught. Now you give me pushback.
I tend to agree that there's something that makes it important for you to take action. Right. So yes, you can do the learning, do that. And so when I say leadership can be taught, yes, it can. But typically that's only going to be effective if the person chooses. Right. They opt in some form. And so it might be, the initial opt-in might be, I'm just going to go through the motions because I've been told it's good for me, But over time, if they start to get evidence of, this could be working, I could be getting some wins here, then, maybe they open up to the opting in, as opposed to some people who opt in like that's for me, I'm going to go for it. So there's there's a variety of ways to opt in and make the choice, and at different points. But I agree. I don't think that everyone will do that and will want to do that. And to be honest, and there's leaders. Look, everyone's a leader of self.
Yeah.
People do it differently, and some are more successful than others, and that's fine. But if we had a world full of people who all wanted to be the leader at the top of the tree, that could be problematic in itself. And so there are levels and different contributions of leadership for different people. But for those that that we're looking to lead our large organisations and lead our communities and lead our government and that sort of thing, I think, yes, there is an opt-in factor there.
Yeah, I think what I guess I'm not saying it right. I think in my mind, I'm thinking of those like the 1-5% of people. Many people play basketball, but then there's Michael Jordan. They're all leaders. All the people that play basketball are leaders. They all lead because they lead like high school students and college. But then you have your Michael Jordan, which is the leader of the leaders. So I guess they're all capable, but there's only a few that do that extra mile to become that true leader. And I think I'm not getting my message across the right way, but that's what I mean about that.
Yeah, and look, and I would agree with that. There are going to be people that have all of the equipment and desire and that thing that it's such an important thing to them, and they're going to drive through to do that. Can you teach that? I don't know that you can teach it. I think it's there.
Yeah.
But you might help someone to uncover it for themselves, to recognize, actually, I do have that potential and I could do that.
I like that. Yeah.
And they hadn't realized that for themselves. So I think that's possible.
I agree.
But it's not everyone, that's for sure.
I agree. I think that's very well put. I think there's a lot of people that have that potential that just need that awakening from someone else for them to realize that they have that.
Yeah.
I want to talk about email etiquette. I think it's something that leaders don't really focus much on. So sometimes something that leaders probably don't think much about, and I email a lot of leaders daily for the show. How much can you judge someone's leadership based on how they respond to people through email that may not currently be on their level of success or achievements? Let me give you an example. So I'm going to give 2 examples. I'm not going to use the names of the people that I've emailed, but if I say the names, they're very renowned leaders around the world. You would know who they are. So I reached out to a person and they replied with, I quote, "Thanks for reaching out, but I don't do stuff like this. Sorry, too busy making name of the company better."
Listen.
And then I had reached out to a different person and they responded with, "I hope you don't mind me responding on," let's just call him Bill's behalf. Thanks for your interest in talking with Bill and seeking his advice. Unfortunately, in parentheses, and despite the fact that Bill loves to discuss business and the future, because Bill's time is so constrained right now, he must decline. Thanks again for thinking of Bill and good luck with your endeavors. Very 2 different type of responses, very 2 different type of leaders. How important is it to teach leaders how to reply to people that are I don't want to use the word below, but you know what I mean, like not as successful or on the level where they are?
Yeah. It's such an interesting area because we don't know the intentions behind those emails, but the people receiving them will take something away from those emails. And I think so it's not actually about the email itself. It's about getting leaders to recognize the potential consequences of the way they correspond and the potential impact. For most leaders who are, have a bit of awareness and are doing quite well, the last thing they want to do is to limit someone else or to disrespect them or, any of those things. And so they would hate to realize that an email they had sent created that kind of an outcome. So I think it's about the awareness piece, recognizing the potential impact and therefore making sure that the email is framed in a way that's far less likely to create that impact and create more of the impact that they want to be having on the world.
Yeah. It's because like the email that was more better put is he's probably one of the biggest leaders in the world. And it's like, it made me respect him so much more. And while the other person's company may not be as big, but it made me be like, maybe it makes sense why your company is not as big. That's where I thought of it. It's like, it goes back to like, if that's how you're responding, I'm sorry, but if in 2024 you're saying you don't have time to do stuff like this and it's a podcast, you being on a podcast is probably more impactful than you going on TV nowadays. The reach is just so much more, and it's I guess being tapped into reality is I feel like is where that disconnect is.
Yeah. I think so. There's a few things that come up. One is some people are just not very good at email, right? That just, it's not their strength. They don't pay a lot of attention to it. They're disorganized and rushed, and so it can come out like that one. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was poor intention behind it. And so, there's lots of factors at play. I think the important thing is that leaders, when they have bigger profile or they have a bigger reach and that sort of thing, is to recognize the potential impact they can have, and to be savvy to that, and to, how do I want to show up in the world? That's the email.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you know who Gary Vee is, but
Yep.
okay. So he's been speaking so heavily on LinkedIn in 2024.
Yeah.
If you're not on LinkedIn and you're sleeping, and
Good.
obviously you are very active on LinkedIn. As I mentioned, LinkedIn's top voice you've received multiple times. How important has LinkedIn been for you as personally and for your career?
Um, Yeah, look, I think LinkedIn has been valuable. I think as a professional, someone operating in a commercial context of some kind, or even in a community context, LinkedIn's a really powerful tool. And so for me, I have tremendous reach. I have global connections. I was just last month in Florida at a conference. And I knew that one of my LinkedIn connections was going to be there, but I met 3 others of my LinkedIn connections there. And it's really amazing when you go to the other side of the world at a conference that I didn't sort of say, hey, I'm going to this conference to LinkedIn. I just went. And there are all these people. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know you. So I think the power of that connection, both online and then the potential to make it face to face, is incredible. The ability to source information, to share information and experiences, is kind of unprecedented, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I think I would agree. I feel like LinkedIn went through a little bit of a not sure about this a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, and I really feel like there's a big actually this is the platform for the professional world to connect. And so for me, it's been incredibly valuable, and I think it's also a great source of feedback. Like, are people responding to this? Or maybe it's not that relevant. Maybe I actually need to be focused on something else. What do I need to be looking at and tapping into that people are really interested in and want support and help and that sort of thing on? So I think in so many ways, LinkedIn can offer incredible insight and value and connection and relationships and all those things we want.
What was your strategy at the beginning stages of building your audience on LinkedIn? Did you take copywriting lessons, like how to write? And, because copywriting is big on how to win over people through writing. I think that's a talent, it's an art. It's something
Yeah,
I've been working on, to be able to have a hook where a person press that see more button to read the rest of the article. But did you have a
yeah.
strategy to building an audience, or it just happened naturally?
So I'll be really honest. So when I very first joined LinkedIn, which was a very long time ago now, was in its infancy, there was no strategy. There was nothing there. It was like, oh, we want to connect. Great, let's connect. I would say over more recent years, it's definitely been much more strategic in the sense of, I'm quite a prolific creator. And so for me, sharing information which I think will be valuable to, my audience is part of what drives me. And so very strategic and very consistent with that, with a variety of kind of forms. And also we're quite strategic in terms of, connecting. I want to connect to people who I think this is going to be valuable for. And so much more purposeful than I was, 10 years ago. And then, just making sure that I think, LinkedIn is amazing, but anyone who's an entrepreneur knows that that database doesn't belong to you. So you need to be thoughtful about, of all these people on LinkedIn, who do I want to have on my database so I can kind of talk to them a little bit more directly if I need to, or want to, or there's something of value that I really want to share, but to a little bit more of an exclusive community, if you like. So I would say, yes, strategic, but I think the most important thing about LinkedIn is to be visible. There are still I don't know what the actual percentage is now, but I know at one point in time it was like less than 1% of people on LinkedIn actually create content.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think the important thing about LinkedIn is be valuable, create connection, create conversation, all of the typical things when we're building that kind of know, like, and trust, especially when you're trying to, as I am, is to kind of elevate something in the world, then, I want to get it out there. So be visible.
That's awesome. Two more questions. Do you remember the first client that you ever had?
I do.
Okay.
Yes.
And what was your mindset first day on the job, first day you walked into that room to sit down with that leader? What was going through your head as the first client that you ever had?
So it was very, very, I'm not even sure if I had my company at this stage, but I was doing masses and masses of learning because I had come out of corporate and I was like, no, I really need to learn all this stuff and skill up and, so that I've got something to offer. And I probably wasn't 100% clear on, exactly where I was going to end up, but I knew it was kind of in leadership and change and those sorts of things. And so all of my initial clients were people that I had worked with in some form in my corporate career. So I sort of already had relationships with them. And I think my mindset or my approach then was really just to see how I could help. That was it. Like, what do they need? How can I help them? And this first person was someone who worked in change leadership and change management. And it was all about, from memory, her becoming more influential so that she could influence the executive to embrace change and to kind of lead change rather than just going, yeah, just go and get it done. We don't need to be part of it. And so it was all about really being in service, and a lot of it was she was a fairly mild mannered, did a lot of work, but there wasn't a lot of fanfare around it. And so a lot of it was about raising her profile and, her seeking out conversation with people who were several pay grades above, and really recognizing that, yes, she was the expert in this space, and she needed, she needed to share with them her insights so that they were more informed and they could make better decisions as the leaders of the organization. And so again, it was about creating opportunity to create the future.
Awesome.
And in fact, we're still in contact many, many years later, and she's gone on to do incredible things in lots of organizations as a leader of change, which is always brilliant.
If her mindset was she wanted to put leading change, she was ahead of her time. So that's I'm sure she's doing great things. I could talk about leadership. I think, like, as we said in the beginning, it can go for 10 hours. There's something to talk about leadership. So I'll leave it on a fun question that I always like to ask my guests. If I was to go back to undergrad, high school, speak to your best friend and your favorite teacher and was like, who was Stacey? What would they say?
Who was Stacey? They would probably say that I was, responsible. I was, if it was school, like a school leader, super active. I was in everything, drama and citizenship and sport. I think I played 7 sports in high school, and super involved. I think I was on the social committee and that sort of thing. And they would have said probably that I was probably quite driven and competitive, that I worked really hard to get good results. But also that I helped my peers, because I used to tutor a lot of my peers as well. And what else would they say?
Your children have some big shoes to fill.
No, they're great. Sports? They're filling their own shoes.
7 sports.
And I was probably just a good citizen, I think.
Awesome. I would love to at some point have you back on and go into your upbringing, because that sounds very interesting. I thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. I want to leave the last words for you. Anything that you want to plug, promote, last words the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, firstly, Nima, thank you so much. What a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And yes, we could speak for like the next week. I think there's so much to cover. I'm here to help elevate the practice of leadership. So follow me on LinkedIn, Stacey Ashley. Jump on my website, staceyashley.com. And I would love to hear from anyone if they've had a light bulb moment or got an insight, and what they do with it. That would be amazing.
Awesome. And not only should people listen to this if they listen to this end, but they should go YouTube, put your name. You have other podcasts that you've done that you have great things that you talk about and great gems that you and advice that you give. So make sure everyone goes and check those out. Once again, Dr. Ashley, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you everyone for tuned in. And this is Nima on the LeaderSeat podcast.